On behalf of the Seattle Planning Commission, I'd like to humbly recognize that we are gathered on Indigenous land, the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Duwamish, Suquamish, and Muckleshoot, Squamish. We thank these caretakers of the land who have lived and continue to live here since time immemorial. We acknowledge the role that traditional Western-centric planning practices have played in harming, displacing, and attempting to erase Native communities, and we respect Indigenous rights to sovereignty and self-determination. We commit to being better listeners, learners, and to lifting Indigenous voices. We also commit to identifying racist practices, to practice allyship, and strive to center restorative land stewardship rather than unsustainable and extractive use of the land. We can move on to announcements. Welcome to any members of the public. Do we have any members of the public on the call?
Not at this moment.
Okay. Which means I can skip that section?
Yes.
Okay. So we'll move on to color-brave space norms. I'd like to ask commissioners to review our revised color-brave space norms that are up on the screen. And I invite a commissioner to choose one to read aloud.
I'll read aloud. This is Matt.
Go ahead.
Keep focused on our collective goal, create racial justice through Black liberation and Native sovereignty.
Thank you. On the agenda today, so we have one single agenda item. We're starting a little bit later, I think, as a result of that. And that is to review and comment on the draft letter of support for the mayor's proposed housing levy. Before we move on to the agenda item, though, we have one item of business before that, which is to approve the minutes from the April 13th, 2023 meeting. Can I get a motion to approve those minutes?
Rick moves.
Rocky seconds.
Rocky seconds. Any changes or amendments? And can I have a vote to approve? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
All opposed?
Julio says aye.
No opposed. Are there any abstentions? The minutes from the April 13th meeting pass. Chair's report. We have some upcoming commission meetings. On Thursday, May 4th, we have the meeting of the Housing and Neighborhoods Committee from 7:30 a.m. to 9 a.m. And that meeting will be held online only using the MS Teams platform. And then we come back together as a full commission on Thursday, May 11th from 3 to 5:30 p.m. And that meeting will be held both in person and on MS Teams. Vanessa, if you could take us away with some announcements and commission business.
Sure. Thank you, Michaela.
Yeah.
We don't have any, although we don't have any members of the public on the call, I will just remind everybody, all commissioners on the call and in the room with Olivia and myself. This is a hybrid meeting, so some commissioners are in the room, others are joining the call. During the meeting, there will be opportunities for questions and comments from commissioners. We will be using the chat function of MS Teams for all commissioners to join the discussion queue. Just a reminder that the discussion queue is not for substantive discussion, as members of the public, if they do join, are not able to see that. And I will read any public comment emailed to me prior to the meeting. None has been received so far. If somebody chooses to join us in the boards and commissions of City Hall, we will recognize them at the end of the meeting and take their public comment. A reminder that we are now recording our full commission meetings and posting them via YouTube to our website. And note that these recordings are not instead of our minutes. The minutes remain our record of formal record of the meeting. And I'm just going to suggest we do quick round of introductions, no icebreaker this morning, and start with Michaela, and we can popcorn around because for those commissioners on the call, we now can see each your faces as well as your name. So,
Okay, great. All right, well, Michaela Daffern, I use she, her pronouns. I live in the Capitol Hill neighborhood and I work in affordable housing policy and planning, and I'm co-chair of the commission. You want to go, Rose?
Popcorn to me. So Rose Lucella Whitson, pronouns they, them. Live up north in Lincoln Springs, and I work for Jacobs as a wetland biologist, project manager, and permitting specialist. Dalton, you're next on my list.
Cool. Yeah. Hey everyone, Dalton Owens, pronouns he, him. I live in the Ballard neighborhood and I work as a project engineer for Venture General Contracting. Yeah, and then I'll popcorn to Caleb.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Caleb Sawolde. He, him pronouns. I live in Columbia City and I work as a leadership development coordinator at Rainier College. And I'll pass it off to Rocky.
I can go next. Hello, my name is Julio Sanchez. Pronouns are he, him. When in Seattle, I reside in the Capitol Hill neighborhood. And the cute little kitten is to grab your attention and let you know that God Green is looking for board members. If anybody is interested, reach out to me.
I suppose I'll go next. Rocky De Herrera, he and pronouns. I live in Finney Ridge. I work for a for-profit housing developer, Legacy Group Capital. And I will pass it on to Rick.
Thanks, Rocky. I'm Rick Moeller, use he, him pronouns, live between Wallingford and Green Lake. I'm an architect and on the faculty at the University of Washington, and I will pass it to Deanna.
Good morning, I'm Diana Quintanar. I use she, her pronouns. I live in Capitol Hill and I'm a multimodal transportation planner and urban designer. I am not sure who has not gone yet. Matt?
hello. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm the last, but my name is Matt Hutchins. I use he, him pronouns. I am an architect in West Seattle. Is there anyone else? I can't see everybody on the screen.
That's all the commissioners. How about Robin and then Olivia?
Robin McGonigal, she, her, they, them pronouns. I live on Vashon Island and I am staff to the commission.
Good morning, everybody. Olivia Baker, I use she, her pronouns, and I'm also staff to the commission.
And I'll wrap us up. Vanessa Murdoch, I use she, her pronouns. I live in Greenwood Finney, just outside of the Greenwood Finney Urban Village, and I'm staff to the commission. And I'll turn it back to Michaela.
Okay. And with that, I'm going to introduce Olivia. Olivia is going to walk us through the draft letter of support for the mayor's proposed housing levy. This was emailed to you last week and again this morning, so it should be at the top of your inboxes. Following the briefing, I will facilitate a discussion by first asking commissioners for clarifying questions. If you don't have a question, feel free to pass and I'll circle back to you at the end of the questions portion of the discussion. Following questions, we'll open the floor for discussion. When you want to engage, please note your name and the general topic and issue of the comment in the chat so that Vanessa can assist in monitoring the queue and ensuring that we all have an opportunity to participate in the discussion. We have 35 minutes for this agenda item, maybe a little less. We have until 8:45. Okay, great. And with that, I will invite Olivia to take it away.
Great, thank you, Michaela. So as Michaela mentioned, we're going to be talking about the staff draft of the housing levy comment letter. We spoke about the sort of rough outline of the housing levy comment letter at our last meeting. And I gave you a sort of an overview of what we know so far about the mayor's proposal that's been made to city council for the housing levy. I'm going to just do another quick little recap because a few more details have sort of come out as Office of Housing and the mayor's office presents this information to city council. So you've seen this table before. I presented it last time, but I've added a few more details in the sort of farthest left column of information here under the mayor's levy proposal. As you can see, they've now come out with the expected production and preservation numbers for rental housing. So they've broken that down. Before, I think the information was just sort of along the lines of over 3,000 units of new housing will be produced. And so they've sort of fleshed that out now between what will be production, what will be preservation, and what will be affordable home ownership. So there's a little more detail for you there. And we can always come back to this slide if there's any questions. But otherwise, most of the information has stayed the same from the last time that I shared it with you. And then there were also a couple of questions last time about the cost assumptions that were going into some of these production numbers. I shared out this presentation that was created by the Office of Housing for City Council. This is just one slide from that presentation, but I thought it might help answer some folks' questions about some of the, the numbers that are going into those production goals. And so you can see they have different cost assumptions based on the size of the unit on the far right. They're also factoring in on the bottom far left, you can see the amount that they expect the levy to go towards each contribution, the contribution of the levy for each unit versus the total per home cost that they're assuming and how that sort of plays in with other funds that they use to build these units. Give you a second to look over that. And again, we can come back to any of these slides if there's any questions. So next I wanted to move into just the outline, and then I'm going to give you all a 5-minute review session so you can look at the draft itself and sort of read through the details if you haven't had the chance to look at it already. But based on our conversation at the last full commission meeting, the outline of the letter is as follows. It starts off with some strong remarks of sort of kudos for the mayor's office in producing such a strong levy proposal. The second section moves into a discussion of the context of the levy and sort of the context of the need, and describes the system in which the levy sits as far as funding for affordable housing, and positions the levy as a strong or an important piece of that overall system for Seattle's affordable housing needs. The next section describes a bit about how the levy continues to be a really solid investment for Seattle. It gives some kudos to the Office of Housing and talks about how they've been good stewards of those funds. And then the letter closes with a section that gives some highlights from the mayor's proposal that the commission sort of applauds and hopes that the council carries through to the final version that goes to voters, as well as a couple of recommendations for changes that you all suggested were included. So again, that's a really high level recap because I'd like you to look at the draft itself in detail. So again, it should be in your inboxes. Go ahead and ask in chat if you don't have it, and I can try to send it there as well. I'm going to move into a 5-minute review time, and then we can come back and ask any questions that the group has about either the information that was in the slides or the draft itself before we move into a discussion of edits you'd like to see. So I'm going to give 5 minutes to have you all take a look. Questions. Use the same. Use the key. Okay, so I'll have folks come back. That was about 5 minutes. So hopefully everyone had the chance to at least take a peek at the draft if you haven't had the chance to read through it all the way. And I'll turn it over to Michaela to lead us through any questions folks have before we move into a discussion.
Okay. So with that, I'm gonna walk through, and call on people to see if you have any clarifying questions. You can pass, but I just want to make sure we have a chance to hear from everybody. And first up is Matt. Do you have any questions?
Yeah, with the letter, is that recommendation about looking at cost of units, is the intent there that we're also looking at the jump in administrative costs?
Which are you talking about? Sorry, I'm just looking at it now.
Let's see. Yeah, I'm sorry. I just cut and pasted. I don't know which. Let's see. One of the recommendations at the bottom was, to try and produce more units, and I wasn't sure if that was being cagey about like whether the total amount should be bigger or whether the pie should be, more thinly sliced, I guess.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that one is based off of an earlier conversation we had that maybe the recommendation should be focused on units rather than dollar amount. Certainly if the commission just wants to go ahead and say, go for a bigger dollar amount, we can do that if that's what the group feels like it would be best. As far as the piece on the administrative costs, I have asked for more information from the Office of Housing on sort of the main drivers of their administrative costs going up, but unfortunately I haven't heard a response at this point. But I think my recommendation would be for the group to think about the tone of making a remark sort of questioning the use of administrative funds, and if that is in keeping with the rest of the tone of sort of supporting the Office of Housing's use of the funds and their administration of the levy. So I'm open to including that if that's what the group wants, to have a more pointed remark about those growing administrative costs. But I think I'll open it to the group to see if people want to include that or if they feel that that's an inconsistent tone with the rest of the letter.
Can we actually hold that for the discussion part of the conversation, just so that we get through our questions first? And we'll circle back to that as our first discussion point. Rose, you passed. Rocky.
I pass. Thank you.
Okay. Deanna?
I pass for questions.
Okay. Dalton?
I'm also going to pass.
Okay. Jamie?
Pass for now.
Rick?
Pass.
And Julio.
So I'm going to ask the questions, and you can choose to respond and to talk about them now or later, because I'm unsure of where they go. So my first question is about community participation in the funds. How is it that the community gets to maybe fund projects that are community-led, or how does the money or a portion of the money available becomes available for people in the community? Excuse the noise. This is what happens when you live in a tropical island. Everybody feels the need to shout. So that's my first question. The second question is, I wonder, we say that the levy has been successful, yet we come back often, always saying we need more money. How can we combat the perception by some members of the public that if the levy is successful, why do we keep coming back and asking for more money? So those are my two questions, and they can be addressed now or later.
Olivia, do you want to field either of those now?
I can speak a little bit to the first one, although I certainly don't have the most definitive of answers on that. I think to the best of my knowledge, there isn't a specific program within the housing levy to sort of distribute funds into the hands of public organizations that want to lead a project that's sort of built from the ground up. But a lot of the projects are, the funds are sort of distributed to community organizations that are developers of affordable housing that come up with the projects and determine, you know, what sort of support they want to provide to the communities that they're housing and how they want to build into the fabric of the community. So I think there is an element of community within how the funds are dispensed. I think if you're thinking more about, say, the Equitable Development Initiative, which is obviously a separate fund within the city, and how they give funds directly to community organizations to form projects. They also give funds to community organizations just for sort of, what's the word I'm looking for, to sort of develop their own capacity, so capacity building funds. I think that might be more along the lines of how you're thinking the money would be spent. And if that's the case, then that is not included within housing levy funds. But the city does have, you know, money going from the Jumpstart tax and I believe some MHA funds going towards that type of initiative. Does that answer your question? Yeah, okay. And the second question, I think, is maybe a discussion point for the group. So we can move to that aftermath if there's no ones.
Okay. I think that takes us through, I don't have any questions and everybody else has deferred. Just check one last time. Any other clarifying questions out there among the group before we move on to discussion? Okay. So let's circle back to the first discussion point. So Olivia, do you want to pick it back up again and just recap what?
Sure, and Matt can always chime in if I'm not recapping correctly, but I think the question is, in the recommendation section, the first bullet point suggests that they adjust the levy to produce more new units of rental and homeownership housing to better meet the need. And I think the question is, should we be more pointed about whether or not the city should go for a bigger levy, go for more dollars, or should we be asking that they redistribute some of the funds from perhaps other sections to produce more units? And are we being pointed enough about how the funds are being spent? And I know, Matt, you've had a recurring question about the way the administrative portion of the levy has increased since the 2016 levy, and maybe a question about where that spending is going. And I think my question back to you and to the group is that something we want to include in the letter, or is that more of a point of curiosity we want to explore, but maybe not call attention to? So I think that's my recap, and I'll open it up to the group.
Trying to figure out who here in the queue.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I have a thought, but I don't know if anyone else does.
Rocky, did you have a comment related to this comment thread?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I understood Matt's question, if it really was about bigger dollars. I took it probably because I wanted to hear it as lowering administrative costs for development. And we've talked about this before. I'm a broken record, but even, and I don't mean for all housing, even for affordable housing, things like costs for main extensions that really impact how much per unit costs increase. And so I would advocate for something like that in the letter, but also happy to be outvoted.
Yeah, my point was this: the number of units was relatively the same, but the cost of administration had more than doubled. And I totally understand the escalation of construction costs to some degree, but I don't understand how it's going to cost twice as much to administer unless you're just applying kind of like a, you know, it's a bigger levy, so it must take more money to, or more time to administer, as opposed to the same amount of time to just deliver the same number of more expensive units.
And I know we're waiting for information back on why it's larger. I will bet it has to do with the cost and time and expertise required to submit for permit application. I you know, we'll see, but I believe it.
Olivia, have we actually put in a formal request to get more information on that? Are we able to request that information of why the change from the December proposal to now with the admin costs?
I have just, it wasn't, I suppose, a formal request. I've emailed a staff member at the Office of Housing that I've spoken to before, asking what the main drivers of that cost increase are, and have not heard back in response to that question. So perhaps I defer to Vanessa about if there's a different channel we should try to go through.
We can continue to ask the question. And I would just, to Olivia's earlier point, I think we want to be careful in being consistent in the tone across in the letter. It's fine to have questions. If questions are raised in the letter or concerns, those could be taken out of context and used by somebody challenging the housing levy. And just want to bring that to all of your attention. Somebody could say, well, the Seattle Planning Commission is really questioning the administrative costs here, and maybe the levy is too big. And that isn't what we've, as staff, have heard all of you say, that if anything, the levy should be considered, I think, as Michaela has said, a baseline, not a ceiling.
Okay, just to clarify, Rocky, I do, if I remember correctly from the last presentation that Olivia gave, the administrative costs were associated primarily with the staffing costs for the Office of Housing. And so I do not know or think necessarily that SDCI permitting costs or sort of that staffing cost is reflected in that administrative line item, nor do I think infrastructure improvements or construction costs are reflected in the administrative line item. That in particular is showing up in the cost per unit estimates that they're using.
Yeah, if we hear back that it's not an issue, then we can leave it alone.
Okay.
In my opinion. Thanks.
Okay. I'm sorry, I'm new to figuring out how to facilitate around topics.
So
Who has
so Jamie
related
and
questions?
Rose both have related.
Okay.
Then Deanna, then Rick.
Okay, thank you. I'm new to this. So I'll call on Jamie next to keep this discussion going.
Thanks, Michaela. I would just say I hesitate to put anything in the letter that without the full information. So yes, the administrative costs have gone up significantly, but we don't know why, and we haven't heard back yet. And so I do not want to put something in there without having the full picture. And I think part of that is very much a political decision, because the moment that we put that in, it can get used and it will get used. And I don't want that to potentially be detrimental to the housing levy overall, since we all clearly very much support funding affordable housing. And so I think that's something that unless we're putting in there as a question, but even a question is going to raise questions. So I think if we put the question in, we need to be ready to deal with the potential fallout from that. So I think it needs to be very intentional if we are pushing for that. And to Olivia and Vanessa, if we're not hearing from the Office of Housing and they're not responding to us, then we need to say we might ask that question then if we're not hearing from it. Because I think it's important that we're getting some of that feedback here. Yes, and I agree with what Rocky says in the chat.
Rose, do you want to go next?
Yeah, so kind of adding to, I would avoid putting anything about administrative costs in. That seems more like a question conversation offline. If only because I also want to recognize that the people administering the housing levy are probably overworked, burned out. I'm assuming we haven't really fully accounted for cost of living increases in the last however many years. And so for me, that's not really the sticking point. The sticking point for me is how do we make things better for everyone, people administering and people who need housing? Because we're all part of the same pie. So I would leave it out. And then to the question on, one of my comments was, in fact, do we think the levy amount needs to be more? Because what I didn't see clearly stated, I saw that we supported the mayor's outline, but I didn't see a clear statement from the commission about how big, how bold to be. And I'd like that to happen.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to read now Deanna's comment that's in the chat box. I believe we have a member of the public now listening in. so they can't see the comment thread.
I'm
Or
here.
do you want to?
Yeah.
Do you want to read it?
I'm able to speak to this, and it's through the conversation could fine tune some of that. So I did read that we are recommending keeping at least the baseline of the same number of increase in housing units. So I think that that is a good goal, and perhaps the way we frame it is that a proportional increase to maintain the number of housing units from the previous levy would be maybe how we frame, and whatever that amount is what needs to be designed in terms of policy, is to maintain the number of units, perhaps with a focus on the type of units that need to be maintained, as in not just make everything a studio, but have a mix of housing sizes. And I think maybe, as I'm hearing everyone discuss, the implications of the administrative cost, I kind of, what made me think Rocky's kind of comment is kind of more where if there is something to consider or recommend, is when looking at administrative costs in which, as a commission, we acknowledge the need to support and adequately resource and increase, the team and body, behind making the levy materialize. We want to understand, or recommend that if those administrative costs are related to things in the hands of the city to be reduced or better addressed, then that's something that needs to be also included as part of, whoever else is enabling or allowing the levy dollars to reap more benefits than just kind of, the cost of administration. So there might be, again, I'm not being very eloquent about it, and I'm sure Rocky, you'd be able to better phrase what I'm trying to say there, but I think I think Rocky's sentiment, and I'd be behind something that alludes to that without actually calling out on why is the administrative cost up? Because I was going to echo what Rose mentioned, because I think we need to acknowledge the increase in basically inflation and adjustment of salaries, et cetera. So I wouldn't question that. I would question, are we adequately resourcing it? Is that, a fair, increase relative to the economy, et cetera? But of those costs is a large portion of that attributed to administrative costs that are more bureaucratically driven, and can those be better addressed to not be absorbed by the levy and can be absorbed by some other mechanism, so to speak, of efficiencies?
Thank you, Deanna. I do want to just note that it's 8:43. We were supposed to be done at 8:45. Is the group willing to stay on for another 10 more minutes?
I'll have to go, but I can send
Okay. Before we lose people, Olivia, can you tell us what the next steps are, and then we can pick the discussion back up so that Rose has a chance to hear.
Yeah, I'm just looking at Vanessa to confirm. We were planning on approving the letter either at the May 11th meeting or the May 26th or 5th or whatever that date is, the second May meeting. So kind of depending on how today's conversation went. So I think if there's lots of edits and changes, that's fine. We can look at this again on May 11th and then approve May 25th. So we do have time to work all of these changes in. And if folks have additional comments, they're welcome to send them to me offline and I can work them in, and then we can share what those changes are at the next meeting.
Okay, and can you give us a deadline?
Well, it's
sorry.
The May 11th meeting would be 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So I'd have to get it out 1 week from today. So it'd be best if I had any edits from this group by, let's say, end of day Tuesday, next Tuesday.
Tuesday, May 2nd?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So Rose, if you have comments, you can send them to Olivia. Okay, I'm gonna circle back to the queue here, and I think it's Rick.
Yes.
Yes, Rick with his global comment.
Thanks. Some of my global comment has been addressed. I keep coming back to the issue of what is the purpose of this letter and who is the audience. I'm assuming the purpose of this letter is to do whatever we can in our own small way to ensure that the levy passes and that we get as much money out of the levy as we possibly can, and that everything in the letter is in support of that. So I agree with all of the comments that this is not a place for criticism of anything that the city is doing or the Office of Housing is doing. If anything, I think a way of couching our question to OH is we would like to use this opportunity, this letter as an opportunity to explain why the administrative costs have gone up and to support you in that effort. If we can't get a good answer, then we let it go and we deal with it later after the levy has passed. So my question is, because there's a heavy risk and reward issue here, will it be helpful for us to be bolder and suggest that the city go bigger with the levy, so that whether it's council or the mayor's office or OH can hold up this letter and say, look at what the planning commission is recommending relative to what we're doing? Or is that a potentially risky strategy? I do not know as much about the politics behind this as others on the call. But I think we need to be extremely strategic in the way we couch this. What I meant to say at the beginning is I actually think the draft is a really strong letter. So kudos to the committee and to staff. I think it's a really strong foundation. I think it might need a little bit of tweaking, but my bigger question is, what is the most effective strategy to ensure that this thing gets passed and that the total is as much as it can possibly be?
Okay, well, to your first kind of comment around the administrative costs, I saw thumbs up from Rocky, from Deanna. So I think that there's some sort of support for that strategy. I'm not entirely sure where the group stands on the second question, but I think that is a really important and foundational question for us to answer. And I saw Julio raise his hand as maybe wanting to reply to that. Yeah.
Actually, just to add that I would be perfectly A-okay urging the city in the letter to perhaps increase the lobby, as long as then we provide sound reasoning that might disarm people that will immediately say no. So for example, we need more housing, whatever the reasoning is.
Okay. I have Rocky on my list as next. Are there other sort of related comments to Rick's comment before we move on? Anybody else sort of want to weigh in on that? Yeah.
Can I just maybe follow up on what Julio said? I think the letter already does a good job about like kind of saying we're, this only tackles 13% or whatever the number is going to end up being when we adjust it to the real number. But I do think I want to go back to emphasizing what you had said, or what the letter and you recommended, Michaela, which is and Vanessa summarized, which is this is the baseline, not the ceiling. As the baseline, it needs to increase because we're not meeting even the same number of units. And so that is part of what Julio is saying, which is the rationale behind why it needs to increase. And I would recommend we think about 3 reasons. Just it's a good number. What are the 3 reasons why it needs to increase? 1, to match the this is the baseline, needs to match the previous delivery. 2, 3, whatever. I'll end there.
Okay. Olivia, I know you have to, or Rose, I know you have to go, and you said you have an idea for reasons. Do you want to share those?
I mean, I feel like this is my usual soapbox. I mean, making units accessible costs more money, and I would like to see all new units be accessible.
That's a great point.
Plant a seed.
Yes.
Okay, Rocky, I think you have a question.
I mean, I think we're all ready to talk about the actual cost of the levy. And so I, as Rick said, it's a very delicate balance between, and some might call it a science. I certainly do not, but finding out what is the maximum dollar amount that the public will approve. And I would guess that maybe not smarter people than us, but people who focus on that for a living have arrived at that number, and it's not a made up number. It's not by accident. So if there is a way for, and I mean, and I fully, this is a drop in the bucket. The levy should be much higher. The question is, can it be approved higher? And so if there is a way to say more explicitly that we would support a higher amount, if it's achievable, then we should. But I don't think we should presume that we know better what the public will accept than those, including the mayor, who put this forward.
Rocky. Okay, Matt?
I guess the question would be whether it's our responsibility to know what is politically expedient as opposed to what might be best for the city in the long term. Sort of take the hit with regards to and provide some cover for politicians. I kind of fall into the camp that it's quite reasonable for us to be explicitly asking for a larger amount if it's tied to some rationale for why it should be. If it's one of three legs of our affordable housing sort of stool, whether it should be be doubled and be handling closer to 30% of the upcoming need, for example. Just like I think right now it feels like the metric that was used to define this amount was basically keep it under $1 billion and produce at least as many as we did the last time. And that seems like a really it just doesn't seem to be like address the real need. And I would love to have it recast as something that's a little bit more proactive, not just sort of keeping our heads above water, but actually making headway.
Go ahead, Deanna.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point, Matt. And I think to reiterate the fact that we want to. I had like 3 thoughts in my head, and now I lost my train of thought. I'll come back because I got sidetracked, but it'll come to me because I started thinking about something else when Matt was speaking, and so I'll come back.
Okay, Jamie, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I agree with Rocky, having also worked in local government during the levy season. Is like these numbers are very carefully thought through, and there's almost always polling that is done with it to test the kind of how it would land with voters. And it's like this very delicate science that happens of what do they think is going to be the maximum amount that you can get with it without like it failing. And I think that that pushing it too hard that's what the risk you're taking, right? Is the whole thing fails and then you get no additional money. And so one, I would trust a lot of that work that's happening from the Office of Housing and from the staff. I'd also be curious about what Rick has said about like HDC has also apparently done their own polling around this. And so getting a sense of their numbers might be helpful, but I would err on the side of like still demonstrating that the need, because we all agree it's not enough, right? So I think what we should say is like, we acknowledge that like this is the amount we're asking for. We know it's not enough, but this is still a really important step that we need to support, and we need to support the housing levy as a whole.
I remember, Michaela, what I was going to say. I think, we need, and I don't know if we have these numbers handy. I remember this is a topic in so many forums that we all probably have participated in. I can't remember exactly the source, but there's got to be a way to quantify what is the cost of not housing folks, right? And we know what that costs to the city to manage the externalities of not having affordable housing for folks. And so what is that budget to manage, basically the day-to-day of not having housing for people? That is probably a huge amount of money that is not kind of earmarked and people don't account. And so there might be an argument to say, hey, this recognized nonprofit or source or whatever has, identified that X number of millions of dollars are being spent just in associated management of the externalities of not having housing. We need to make sure that we're capturing some of that to this, right? To make sure we're making better strides to make this. And that's why we're proposing a more bold proposition of increasing it while making sure that it doesn't get jeopardized. And so something to the tone that I can't remember right now who said it last, Jamie maybe, we still want to support this in whatever shape or form it comes, right? And we defer to the experience and knowledge of the Office of Housing, but we want to be bold about it because we also know that the cost of not doing it and not having more reliable sources of funding that are structured and directed is going to hurt society more.
Yeah. I'm not aware of a study that quantifies the negative externalities of the cost of inaction. But I think, you know, we know that they're there, we know that they exist, and I think we can at least make some statement in that regard. And I think there's not just a financial cost to inaction, there's a societal cost as well.
Right.
Of not being able to have a diversity of people living in your community and working in your community. And there's a whole host of waterfall effects. Jamie has one more comment, and I think that will be our final comment for the day before we adjourn. You get the last word, Jamie.
Oh, no pressure. I will highlight what Rick said in the chat for everyone. It does sound like that's a really great topic for a future report, Deanna. I think though that like what that sounds like to me is also more about like messaging and how it resonates with voters in order to build support, which is not like, there's also like what gets tested in polling too, is like they'll test different messaging to see like what actually lands. And so I hesitate to put that in without like really having all of the backing of the science and the like knowing what has actually resonated with folks. But I do think that that's a great topic for us to explore in a future report.
Okay. Thank you all. Yes, thank you so much for staying late. I just want to check out with Olivia to make sure, do you have any lingering questions for us, and or anything you need in order to do in the next draft?
I think there's still a little lack of clarity around if we want to state a larger dollar amount is necessary, or if we want to sort of hedge with, we support whatever the city leadership thinks is best, but we think more is good. So I'm going to kind of go with that second approach because that's what I heard most often, but I'm happy to hear otherwise, either via email or at the next meeting if you read what I write and you think, no, it's still not strong enough. So I think that's perhaps the approach we'll go with. But please, if you have any direct comments on the draft or other thoughts, go ahead and send them to me by May 2nd.
Okay. And Vanessa just said she'll put that in an email out to the group, so we all have another reminder. Okay, with that, I thank you all so much for a robust discussion this morning, and thank you for our patience while we reached quorum. I hope everybody has a great day, and this meeting is adjourned.
Thanks all.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Remember, if you're interested in Got Green membership, reach out to me.
Okay.